Welcome. Thanks for joining us today for this new project that Skyland Alliance is helping with. And I'm Emily Burns. I'm the program director here at Sky Island Alliance. And Helen, you want to say hello?
Hi, I'm Helen Rowe. I'm a research professor at Northern Arizona University and one of the faculty involved in this project.
Oh, thanks for being here. Well, let's dive on in, and I'm going to walk you through the background for the project and then explain exactly what it takes to collect samples for the project. I've been doing it for a couple of weeks now, and it has been a lot of fun to drive around Tucson looking for this plant. London rocket. This is our public enemy that we're sampling. So while it's frustrating seeing this plant be so prolific this year, it does provide us an opportunity to do some interesting climate change studies. And this project is part of a big collaborative project.
Emily, were you going to record this?
Um,
Or you are recording? I'm sorry. I didn't hear the thing say now recording, so sorry about that.
No problem. Thanks. No, it's always good to check. I was like, I thought I did, but sometimes the buttons get away from me. So this project is coming to us from the Southwest Integrated Field Laboratory. And there's a bunch of different groups involved, and we're excited to be one of the partners supporting the data collection. But Helen just introduced herself. Helen Rowe is a faculty member at Northern Arizona University, and she has several collaborators on the project working on different aspects of measuring fossil fuel emissions so that we can better understand how where the big sources are of pollutants are in our communities. So the big question we're trying to answer here is, how are annual plants part of the puzzle of understanding point source pollution from fossil fuel emissions? And we're going to go through all the steps of that. But it's kind of fascinating that annual plants, these are plants that can live their entire life cycle within a single season. And right now we've had such prolific winter rains. They have this interesting role to play in telling us what was going on in the air around them as they do their whole life cycle. So this all starts with what I'm sure you're all very familiar with, that climate change impacts are very real. We're seeing them all around the world. We are experiencing them here in Southeast Arizona, in Sonora, the other part of the Sky Island region where we work. We're seeing more intense fire regimes, more intense drought. The warming temperatures are causing all kinds of issues, and we have no idea ever how much rain we're going to have. And the last 5 years, the amount of rain coming in has been incredibly variable. And the reality is that these trends are likely to continue, and it's a result of the global greenhouse gas emissions that are going into the atmosphere. So we know that that is part of the problem, and the pie chart here breaks down the different proportion of gases that are leading to climate change in the atmosphere, and carbon dioxide specifically being produced from fossil fuels and industrial processes is 65%. So that's a huge majority of the greenhouse gases that are being emitted are coming from that source. And that's what we're particularly studying and looking at in this project. The reason why we really care about this is there's a lot of political energy and action plans that are being created for communities to figure out how can we address climate change locally, either adapt to the changes that are coming, but even better yet, try to reduce the amount of carbon emissions that are leaving our communities. Unfortunately, most places, and Tucson is the same, doesn't have a good handle on where most of the carbon is being emitted, which means it makes it much more difficult to figure out ways to reduce those carbon emissions if we don't know where the problems are. That said, we can get that information pretty quickly, and this project is giving us a great way to create a visualization and a model that will tell us where we're seeing the most emissions. So the approach that the Southwest Integrated Field Laboratory is using is a project called HESTIA, and it uses isotopic carbon to look at the fossil fuel emissions across urban centers. Now, I'm going to quickly switch over to YouTube video that I think does a really nice job of, if I can find it. Pardon me, 1 second, switch my screen. Here it is. Oops. Okay, let me just optimize it for video. Okay, great. Okay, here we go.
Climate change is happening and will likely accelerate. It is being driven primarily by rising carbon dioxide emissions from the combustion of fossil fuels. Cities currently contain 1/2 of the world's population, contributing over 2/3 of the energy-related greenhouse gas emissions. This is projected to rise in the coming decades as urbanization trends intensify. Strategies to address climate change mitigation in cities are limited by our inability to quantitatively characterize where, when, and how greenhouse gases are emitted. Our response to this challenge is the HESTIA project, a data model system that quantifies all carbon dioxide emitting processes in an urban domain down to the individual building and street level. We have completed this effort in the city of Indianapolis and are currently working on similar efforts in Los Angeles and Phoenix. The methods used to quantify the on-site fossil fuel carbon dioxide emissions combine a series of data sets and simulation tools such as a building energy simulation model, traffic data, power production reporting, and local air pollution reporting. Total annual carbon dioxide emissions have been categorized into commonly used economic sectors. Commercial emissions are laid out in a spoke and hub pattern. Residential emissions are laid out in surrounding subdivisions. Industrial emissions are large and placed along major transport arteries. There's one large international airport, a regional airport, and a heliport downtown. Vehicle emissions are restricted to minor arterials and larger. Electricity production is dominated by the large coal-burning power plant near the city center. The coal-burning power plant and the international airport are the two dominant emitting sources within the Indianapolis landscape. Hourly emissions show a more dynamic nature. Note that the commercial buildings have greater emissions during the daytime hours. Residential buildings, by contrast, have greater emissions during the nighttime hours. Vehicle emissions exhibit rush hours in the morning and in the evening. Here are all the sectors combined for night and day. Note the morning transition from the enhanced residential carbon dioxide emissions to the vehicle emissions, and then to the commercial and industrial emissions as the business day evolves. Finally, we present a sped-up day-night cycle for the winter on the left and the summer on the right. Note how the winter building emissions are far greater than the summer equivalent due to greater building heating demand. The Hestia system can be applied to any US city. The system can be used for verification and holds tremendous potential as a guide for managers and local organizations to create effective, economically efficient emissions reduction options.
All right. So that gives an idea of how these kind of carbon data can be very interesting and beneficial for understanding what's going on in our communities. And we recognize that it's very difficult for researchers to be able to collect the air samples that they would need to at this kind of resolution across all of the cities of the United States, much less around the world. And so what we're really interested in doing here is figuring out how for Tucson, and it's also happening in Phoenix and in Flagstaff, how we can use plants as an integrated measure of the carbon emissions during spring this year. And potentially this is going to get repeated during other seasons, so that seasonal comparison can be made for Tucson as well. And it is something that we can use to help compare with air samples that are being collected in certain places. But if this plant sampling strategy works really well, annual plants are growing everywhere this spring, and it can give us a great way to have this integrated measure. So that's really what this project is all about. And we're going to walk through why it is that these plants actually can give us this integrated measure of carbon emissions. And it has to do with the radiocarbon in the atmosphere. So fossil fuels, really old energy, really old carbon has no radiocarbon, no carbon-14 in it, because it's had the natural baseline that was around when that carbon was produced as organic material. It has had its half-life and it's disappeared basically. So fossil fuel emissions have no radiocarbon in it. The baseline in the atmosphere prior to the 1950s and 1960s, the radiocarbon was relatively low. But because of the bombs that were exploded into the atmosphere, there's a huge pulse into the atmosphere in the 50s and 60s, which means that carbon, there's a lot more radiocarbon now. It is decreasing over time. I'm going to show you a graph about that. So here on this graph, you can see the spike from when this whole huge pulse of radiocarbon went into the atmosphere. So right around here, you see this peak, and it's going down over time. But we are able to use the fact that the more fossil fuels, so if we look at a single point in time, the more fossil fuels that are burned and emitted into the atmosphere, it actually dilutes the amount of carbon-14 in the atmosphere. So that's the one thing to think about. The more emissions from carbon that's old, prior to the bombs exploding, basically, it dilutes the radiocarbon. And a plant growing is integrating that ratio, that signature of all those carbon sources that it's exposed to. The samples that collected plant material can just be air dried, and then it'll get sent to NAU, and it'll be going through their mini carbon dating system, and it's going to give the exact signature and how much radiocarbon is actually integrated into a plant, into the plant. So we'll get those samples. So this is kind of cool because for the growing period of annual plants that are out right now, you know, they started probably growing in February, maybe the beginning of January, up through, we expect them to sort of get crispy and end their life cycle in May this year. They're telling us exactly what the carbon signature is in the atmosphere in the place that they were growing in Tucson. Here's an example of a map of what it looked like during last year. This was done in Flagstaff, and the different colors represent the relative amounts of how much carbon-14 was actually integrated into annual plants. And probably different species than what we're sampling this year in Tucson. But the point being, you can see the different levels out in the more further from the urban center, these darker blue plant samples, you can see they have a much higher level, and then we have a lot less radiocarbon indicated by the orange and the red in the middle of Flagstaff. So less carbon-14 because fossil fuel emissions had diluted that in that local air environment. So where we are in the project, we are working on a series of trainings, and this is one of them, and we've begun field sampling for this spring period. So we can sample plants around Tucson through the end of this month, through April. Then we're going to be collecting all the samples, sending them up to the isotope lab for analysis. Looking at doing, as long as we get good rainfall and more annual plants are growing again later this summer, we'll be doing a fall sampling and repeating the analysis. And we're hoping in a year from now, we're going to be able to report back to everyone about the results of the carbon signatures for these 3 major cities in Arizona. So the strategy for sampling is really simple. I've been doing it, driving around, running errands, and it's actually, it's pretty fun and a little bit addictive. So we're going to walk you through what to do. The first part is going to be about identifying your plant, finding an annual plant, and I'll talk through that in more detail. You're going to need sampling envelopes that we have here at our Sky Island Alliance office. That's where you can pick up samples, sampling envelopes, and then bring your samples back when you're done. You're going to need your smartphone. So if you have an Android or an Apple phone, we'll talk about how to get iNaturalist downloaded on your phone and set yourself up with an account if you haven't. We'll be joining the Swiffle project and making sure you're all set up there. And then we'll talk about how you find your plant. You're going to take an iNaturalist observation. There's some important information to get on the sampling envelope. You stuff the plant inside, and that's basically it. Okay, the reason why the project is based in iNaturalist is because it's the easiest way to make sure that all the research partners know the date and time and exact location of where your sample was collected. That's one of the key pieces because their modeling effort to understand carbon emissions, they need a very accurate location from where you collected your plant. So you're going to go out and you're going to find your plant. Any annual plant really would work for this project, but because we would rather be collecting samples from plants that I really shouldn't be here, these invasive species, we're focusing on invasives first and foremost. Phoenix is focusing on stinknet because unfortunately stinknet is really ubiquitous in Phoenix right now. We have some stinknet, unfortunately, but more so we have London rocket. So we're looking for London rocket out there in all different parts of Tucson. And when you find it, you can check on iNaturalist. And people will help if you're not sure you found London rocket, we can help you identify it based on the photos that you take. Okay, so just feel free to unmute if you want. Does everybody have iNaturalist already downloaded, or do you need a moment to work on that on your phone? Totally fine to pause and get that going on your phone first. So what you want to do is go and get iNaturalist and open up the app. If it's your first time with iNaturalist, you'll need to set yourself up with an account. Let's see, looks like everybody has it. Okay, great. You're all, was there anybody that doesn't have it? I think you all just said you did.
Jana doesn't, but I'm setting her up.
You're setting her up. Okay, you got it covered. Great. Okay, great. And does everybody, you're logged in and you have an ID, you have your own account set up? Okay, so the next step is you're going to navigate to the project. Well, you want to make sure that your high location accuracy is set to be on. This was automatically done on my phone, but you might just want to double check that. So it's a little bit different for Android phones versus for Apple products, the iPhone or iPad. So you just need to make sure that you have it set to high accuracy or always using your location services if you're on an iPhone. If you want me to pause, just shout out. Okay, so it sounds like you all already you're registered, you've got your username. Then the next step is to sign into the project. So once you're in the app itself, down in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a projects button, and you can press that, and then you can search. In our particular project, if you just type in SWIFL, you'll see two different projects come up, and choose the one that says S 2024. That stands for Spring 2024. And then you can just click join. And that's the last thing that you need to do with the project. Once you've joined this project, it means if you take an observation of the plant species on our list, which includes London rocket and stinknet, it'll automatically get sucked into our project. So you don't have to tag the project or anything. It's going to automatically connect your observations to this project once you joined. Okay. So from there, let's say we skip ahead and you already have your sampling envelopes. Then you're ready to go out and find London rocket. So the steps, you go outside, let's say you come across the London rocket like I have here. The first thing you want to do is you want to take a photograph of it. You can take multiple photos in iNaturalist and add it to the observation. So it's nice to take an overview photo that shows both the leaves and the flowers to help with the confirmation of the species identification. That's the first step. Then you can add a second photograph that has your sampling envelope in it once it's already labeled. So I'm going to come back to that step because I haven't told you about what to put on your envelope yet. But you start with taking a photo. It's going to ask you, what do you see? And usually if I just click on that, this is the number 3 section here. If you click on that, you could take a random photo of your shoe right now and just to see what the steps look like. Once you take the photograph, you click on, what do I see? It often will tell you what's been seen around you that might be helpful. You can start typing in the common name London rocket, and that will pull it up. So that's usually what I do is I start typing in London rocket, and then it pops up and you click that species. So the photograph is key, getting the species name in there is key. And then you want to, I'm going to skip to the next slide. So just to make sure you have a little bit more information about London rocket. It's in the mustard family and it has a yellow flower. So what I've noticed is driving around town, it's along every sidewalk, every lot in the neighborhood, everybody's neighborhoods. It's quite everywhere. And oops, skipped ahead. So the flowers are just at the very tip top, and you're going to start seeing they have long seed pods. This one is starting to wilt a little bit, but they have long seed pods like this, and they can get really tall. This plant, I've seen it 4 feet tall, which is quite crazy. In drier areas, it might be very, very small. So the size is not necessarily a good characteristic to identify it with. But once you start seeing it around, you won't be able to stop seeing it. That's been my experience. So it really likes our disturbed environments. Okay. So you find your plant, you take a photo of it, you get the species name into your iNaturalist observation. And then on your sampling envelope, you're going to create your own unique ID for all of your envelopes. And since you're doing the sampling on behalf of Sky Island Alliance, the first 3 letters can be SIA. So all of mine are SIA, and then the 3 letters of my last name, BUR for Burns. So SIA, 3 letters of your last name, and then just number them sequentially. So this is my sample number 14. So before I stuff it with the sample, I write that unique ID code. That also, and this is really important, it helps us out a lot, needs to get into the notes section of your observation. So underneath where you have the species name, there's a section to type in notes, and you can just type right in SIA, your name, and the number of your envelope. Put the date on there, London Rocket, and then something that helps you know the location where you were. So I hiked out in Soaring National Park to Garwood Dam. So that's what I wrote on here. You could put the Latin long that's showing up on your phone, but I find it a lot easier for me to remember, like, oh yeah, I went out to Garwood Dam. That's what this one is. It's just a little bit of redundant location information embedded on the envelope. You're going to go ahead and take a second photo of your envelope to add it to the iNaturalist observation. This is going to help make sure, in case anything else goes wrong, we can always know which observation goes with which paper sample. So that's the second photo that you add. Okay, so this is showing you how you can do that. If you're back in the main observation page, you click the plus button next to your first photo, then you can take a second photo. All right, you make sure you've got your individual ID there in the notes. And then the very last step is making sure that the location that's showing up in your observation is as accurate as possible. And the way that you can do that is you can click on where it says number 1 over here. This one is saying, you can see the little map signal. If you click on that, it's going to bring up a screen, and the blue dot is where your phone thinks you are. And what we notice is that if you click over to location and you give your phone 30 seconds to 60 seconds, it's usually pretty good at centering up the pulsing location dot with the crosshairs. If you've left your phone open to this location section and they're not lining up and you've been waiting, there's just something wrong, you know exactly where you are on the street corner, it doesn't look right, you can move the crosshairs to be on your location, and you're basically overwriting the location based on your visual assessment of this map. I would say only do that if you absolutely know for sure that for some reason it didn't look right on the map. If you do this and it looks right, all you have to do is click cancel. And then you don't need to overwrite anything. It goes back to the original phone location that it assigned to you. Okay. So you click back, you feel good about your location, and then you click share. And you can have it set to upload automatically, or you can wait till you get home and you're on Wi-Fi. You know, that's just your preference when you actually share it. We noticed that some observations that were coming in, the notes didn't come through for some of the samples. You can edit it. So if you get home and you realize, oops, I labeled that for sample 4, but it was really should have been sample 14. You can just go into your list of observations and edit it, update the notes, and then re-upload it, and then we'll have all that information from you. Collecting the samples, it's really pretty simple. I find I didn't really need scissors. I can just rip off leaves or sections of the stem, but it wouldn't hurt to have a pair of scissors with you in case you do have a plant that's a little bit tough. The one thing is we don't want to have any root material. So if you do pull the whole plant out, since it's an invasive, clip off the roots just to avoid any soil or root material getting in the envelope. You want to get enough material to fill the envelope, but it doesn't need to be over full. So I would never be able to get that big plant that I was showing you all the way in here, but I could take 3 or 4 leaves, maybe some of the flowers, and put them in here. You don't need to seal it. No need to seal it. We're just going to let it air dry. So as long as you've got the shoot material in here, don't put it in any plastic bags, no need to refrigerate it. We just want it to dry out as soon as possible, basically. And then just bring the samples back to Sky Island Alliance. And out front, I'm going to give you our address on the next slide. But we have a metal cabinet to the right of our door. It's unlocked. There's a sample collection box that you can leave your samples in, and there's a place to grab fresh envelopes to go out and collect. So that's just totally self-serve. And we're located on the Nature Conservancy property, which is most accessible. This is Cherry right here. So we're in the Fort Lowell and Campbell neighborhood. So if you go 1 block west of Campbell and then turn south on Cherry, we're just in a little house right here. So you can email me if you're having any trouble finding our front door, getting the sample collection up below. Just let me know and I'll help you out. All right, and then just lastly, where to go? There's a lot of things. There are so many places where we want to collect samples. We're looking to collect anywhere between 500 and 700 samples in Tucson. So we have a good start. I feel like we have a good start, but there's a lot we could still collect. So I'm going to switch over to this map. This is the map that if you go to the iNaturalist project page and zoom into Tucson, you'll be able to see real time where samples have been collected. So you can see we have a nice north-south transect over here on the east side. We have a pretty good representation in the foothills, though we don't have any further north, closer up into the Catalina Mountains yet. We're really excited to see the I-10 corridor, and we want the highest density of samples along the freeway and the most industrialized part of Tucson. It would be fine to go every block in the really dense, probably high polluting areas of Tucson. Every block or two would be fantastic. So more samples there is great. And then as we get further away, you could go, 4 blocks, 6 blocks, 8 blocks, spreading out the samples a little bit more. So if that makes sense, higher density in the higher urban corridors. So we have right now a lot more work to do in South Tucson, and then downtown and midtown Tucson, we could definitely handle a higher density of samples. And yeah, so I'm going to pause right there and just see if folks have any questions at the moment about this, or if you want to share places you think you might sample, that's terrific. We can be in touch by email as well, but you could always just look at the map and see where people have been sampling to know whether it hasn't been sampled yet.
What was the section like right after you asked people if they had iNaturalist? I distracted Dan by putting it in, and so neither one of us got whatever was on the screen during that time.
I got it actually. So
Oh,
it's it's the S2024 project. But I do have a question about the collecting samples. So you're talking about wanting industrial areas or heavy pollution areas. Would that include major arterials, like, for example, Speedway, Broadway, Grant, those kind of things, crosstown arterials?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, in an ideal world, I think it would be fantastic to take those east-west roads and stopping every few blocks and collecting a sample. And that kind of density, especially on the west side, would be really helpful. Because right now, I mean, there's a few samples from some of those roads, but we could use a whole lot more. I'm planning next Tuesday to go down and drive around with a colleague. It's really helpful to go in a pair because especially if you're going to pull over, someone can just jump out and do the sample and the driver can focus on, getting out of the way of traffic and things like that. So I'm planning on driving some loops down here in the southern area. But if you're going to dinner in downtown Tucson, stop a couple places, that kind of thing is really helpful.
Can you do me a favor and put the screenshot that was during that time so I could get a picture of it?
I think that was for selecting the project. I think it's one she's asking for.
Help me know which one. And I'm happy I can send this out as a PDF to you as well. That would be helpful. The slides. Are you seeing this one?
That's it.
Yeah, so if you go down to the bottom right and projects, and then we're looking for the Swiffle S 2024 for spring.
Yeah, that was the part we missed the first time around, was the S 2024, because there's two projects that come up, as I'm sure you're aware.
Yeah, well, we realized that with repeated sampling, if we do this again in the fall, for example, we'd want to start with a clean map where we would only see the fall samples showing up. So for that reason, we will have a different iNaturalist project for each season of sampling, just to make sure we always know where the distribution of samples are visually from that particular sampling period. Okay, what else? Any other questions? I'm very happy to meet with folks if you want to train in person, look at iNaturalist together, or go look for London Rocket. So if you want to send me an email after this training, I can set up a time to meet with you and just make sure it all makes sense, finding the plants and everything.
And Emily, you plan to do this through basically late spring, early summer, when the London Rocket has pretty much died off, and then choose a new plant for the fall? Is that the plan?
Yeah, we're really hoping to get all the target sampling done this month in April. So we still have, maybe three solid weeks. It might be able to go a little bit later. The plant material can be dead when it's collected. It's just harder to identify the plants. So I think if it's a lot easier for all of us while the plants are still fresh, and especially when they have flowers, it's really easier to see them from a distance and everything. So Helen, just a question about whether there are any parallel projects happening in California.
First of all, Emily, thanks for your great presentation. Elisa, I don't know one. This is the project that we have. It is a Arizona-centric project, and we are focused on the 3 cities in Arizona. This work has been done in Los Angeles. Some of the preliminary work to look at whether the plants can work as identifying fossil fuels was done in the LA area. So that's cool, but I don't think there's anything ongoing. So I'm glad that you'll be in Tucson and able to contribute there. And if you make your way up, you can take samples in Phoenix and in Flagstaff.
Yeah. What species are you doing in Flagstaff this season?
We haven't started yet because there's not much out yet. But a good spring invasive is cheatgrass. And so that I have started to see it a little bit. It's coming out. And then yeah, later in the fall, we have sort of a whole different suite.
Okay. Yeah, so we might use different species as well for the fall in Tucson. We'll just see what emerges for us. Keep hearing reports of snakenet popping up around here. So unfortunately, we might be having more access to that plant.
If you see it, zap it and stick it in your envelope.
Yeah, get it out of there. Yeah, exactly. It is fun, especially in the denser urban areas where we want more samples collected to go on walks. As Elisa mentioned, it is fun to do it walking, or to, like I said, drive with a buddy. If anybody wants to drive with someone on SIA staff, we could always use another person to do the sampling as a pair. So yeah, just reach out if you want to do that. Oh yeah, good point, Helen. Yeah, so another partner that's working on the project and helping volunteers in Phoenix is the Desert Botanical Garden.
And so they're just like Emily is at Sky Island. The Desert Botanical Garden is taking in samples too. So if you happen to grab envelopes from Emily and then you end up collecting them in Phoenix, you can still drop them off at Phoenix. And the best contact over there is Mary Crystal. Let me come up with her email in case that's useful.
Okay, that's great to know, yeah.
So that's your DBG connection there too. So yes, wherever you go.
Yeah, that's great. So Helen, if we keep getting rain or the plants stay green, I guess we'll just sort of watch how it goes, but there's not a super hard cutoff date, right? Like if we could get more in May, that would be fine too, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, for sure.
that's great. Well, I'm gonna add all of you to my emails that I've been sending out periodically to folks that are volunteering with some tips and suggestions of place to go and questions that have been coming up. So I'll send you all an email to follow up with some more links and information, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions about iNaturalist or anything.
And did you already collect the iNaturalist IDs?
No, that's a good point. So one of the things that I'm going to ask in my email to you is if you don't mind letting me know what your iNaturalist ID is. I have your email address and your name from your registration for this, but I don't know what your iNaturalist handle is. So just to make sure that I'm going to be able to link your observations to your envelopes when they arrive, it's helpful if I know your ID. And on iNaturalist, I'm M. Burns. I'll put that in here. Okay, great. Thanks, Dan. I feel like yours I could have figured out. Some people's I was like, I've been looking at their observations, being like, nope, I don't know who that is. That's great. Okay, cool. All right, well, I'm happy to stay on if folks have other questions, but if you've got what you need to know, just let me know if questions come up while you're out there, and we really appreciate your help with the project.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, bye. Have a good evening.
Right. Thank you. This is really
Thanks.
exciting. Talk to you later.
Bye.